You think you're stuck. You think your situation is the problem, your job, your environment, your circumstances. You look around and you believe, this is why I can't move. This is why I can't change. This is why I'm here. But what if that's not true? What if the real reason has nothing to do with where you are? What if the real reason is how you think? Because there's something you don't see, something you don't notice, something that's been controlling you, quietly, consistently, without you realizing it. A prison, not made of walls, not made of bars, but made of thoughts, beliefs, patterns. And it's more powerful than any physical limitation, because a physical prison, you can see, you can recognize it, you can fight it. But a mental prison feels like reality. It feels normal. It feels like the truth. And that's what makes it dangerous, because you don't question it. You don't challenge it. You accept it as your life, as your limits, as what's possible and what's not. But here's the truth. You're not stuck. Your mind is. And until you understand that, nothing changes. You'll keep looking outside, blaming your situation, waiting for something to change. But nothing will. Because the problem is not your environment. It's your perception, the way you see things, the way you interpret things, the way you respond to everything around you. Because two people can be in the same situation, same place, same circumstances, and one feels stuck, the other feels in control. Why? Because their minds are different, their thinking is different, their perception is different, and that changes everything. Because your mind creates your reality, not fully, but more than you realize. It decides what you believe, what you focus on, what you think is possible, and once you believe something, you act accordingly. If you believe you're stuck, you stop trying. If you believe nothing will change, you don't act. If you believe it's too late, you don't start. And that belief becomes your reality. Not because it's true, but because you follow it. And that's the prison. Not your situation, not your life, your mind, your thoughts, your beliefs. Because they define your actions, and your actions define your life. So if your thinking is limited, your life becomes limited. If your thinking is fixed, your life becomes stuck. And that's where you are, not physically, mentally. And the worst part? You don't realize it, because it feels real, it feels justified, it feels logical. Your mind tells you, this is how things are. This is what's possible. This is your limit. And you believe it because you've been thinking that way for so long, because it's familiar, because it's comfortable, because it doesn't challenge you. But that comfort is what keeps you trapped, because it stops you from questioning, from exploring, from trying something different. And that's how the prison stays intact, not by force, but by acceptance, by you believing that this is all there is. But it's not. There's more possibilities, more options, more paths, but you don't see them because your mind filters them out. It only shows you what you already believe, and that's the limitation, not reality, your perception of it. So if you want to change your life, you don't start outside. You start inside, with your thinking, with your beliefs, with your perception. Because until that changes, nothing else will. You can change your job, your environment, your routine, but if your mind stays the same, you'll end up in the same place, with the same feeling, with the same limitations. Because the prison goes with you, wherever you go, until you break it, until you question it, until you see it for what it really is. And that's the first step. Awareness. Seeing that you're not stuck because of your life. You're stuck because of your mind. And once you see that, everything starts to change. Not instantly, not easily, but clearly.
because now you know where to look, not outside, but inside, because the key was never out there. It was always in your mind.
You weren't born like this. You weren't born limited. You weren't born thinking, I can't do this. This is not possible. This is not for me. That came later, slowly, quietly, without you noticing. Because your mind, it wasn't always a prison. It became one over time, through experience, through repetition, through what you were told and what you believed. Because from a young age, you were learning, not just skills, not just information, but how to see the world, how to interpret things, how to define what's possible and what's not. And most of that didn't come from you. It came from outside, from parents, from school, from society, from people around you, from what you saw, from what you heard, from what you experienced. And you absorbed it without questioning because you didn't know you were supposed to. Because when something is repeated enough, it feels like truth, even if it's not. Think about it. How many times did you hear, be realistic, don't take risks, play it safe, people like us don't do that, life is hard, success is rare? Those statements, they don't seem dangerous. They sound logical. They sound responsible. They sound like advice. But over time, they become beliefs. And beliefs shape your thinking, your perception, your decisions. Because once you believe something, you don't question it. You follow it, automatically, without thinking. And that's how the prison starts. Not with big limitations, but small ones. Small ideas, small doubts, small fears that slowly build into something bigger. Because every time you try something and it doesn't work, your mind remembers it. It records it, it stores it, and it creates a pattern. If it didn't work before, it won't work now. If I failed once, I'll fail again. If it was hard, it's not for me. And those patterns, they become your default thinking, your automatic response, your mental filter. So now, when an opportunity appears, you don't see possibility. You see risk. You see failure. You see reasons not to try. Not because they're true, but because your mind has been trained to think that way. And the more you repeat that, the stronger it becomes. Because your brain, it's designed for efficiency. It creates shortcuts, patterns, habits to save energy. So if you've been thinking in a limited way for years, that becomes automatic, effortless, default. And breaking that feels hard. Because now you're going against your own programming. You're challenging what feels natural, what feels right, what feels safe. And that creates resistance. Your mind pushes back. It tells you this is not you, this is not realistic, this is too much. And you listen because it feels true, because it feels familiar, because it aligns with everything you've believed so far. And that's how the prison stays intact, not because it's real, but because it's reinforced every day. Through your thoughts, through your actions, through your decisions. Because every time you choose comfort over challenge, you reinforce it. Every time you avoid risk, you strengthen it. Every time you tell yourself, I can't, you confirm it. And over time, it becomes your identity. Not something you think, but something you are. The person who doesn't take risks, the person who stays safe, the person who doesn't push limits. And that identity controls everything. Because now, it's not just a thought, it's who you believe you are. And changing that feels impossible.
because you're not just changing actions, you're changing yourself. And that's uncomfortable. That's scary. So instead, you stay inside the prison, inside the familiar thinking, inside the safe limits, because it feels easier, because it feels normal, because it doesn't challenge you. But that's the trap, because the prison is not locked. There are no bars, no walls, no guards, only beliefs, only thoughts, only patterns, and they can change, but only if you question them, only if you challenge them, only if you stop accepting them as absolute truth, because they're not. They're just learned, conditioned, built over time. And what's built can be rebuilt, but you have to see it first. You have to recognize that your limits are not always real. They're often learned. And once you understand that, you gain something powerful, the ability to change them, to break them, to rebuild your thinking from scratch. But it starts with awareness, seeing how your mind created this prison, not intentionally, not consciously, but through patterns, through repetition, through belief. And once you see that, you stop blaming your situation. You stop waiting for change. You stop looking outside, because now you know. The problem is not out there. It's in here, in your mind. And that's where the change begins.
You say you want change. You say you want more freedom, more control, more progress. You feel it, that desire to move forward, to become better, to break out of where you are. But when the moment comes, when it's time to act, something happens. You hesitate, you delay, you overthink, and then you don't move. And you don't understand why. Because on the surface, it doesn't make sense. If you want something, why aren't you going after it? If you know you're stuck, why aren't you changing? If you feel the need to grow, why aren't you acting? The answer is simple. Your mind is protecting you, not helping you. Protecting you. Because your mind is not designed for success. It's designed for survival. And survival means safety. It means avoiding risk, avoiding failure, avoiding uncertainty. Because from your mind's perspective, anything unknown is dangerous. Anything new is a threat. Anything outside your comfort is something to avoid. So when you try to change, when you try to step out, when you try to do something different, your mind reacts. It creates resistance, not obvious resistance, not something you can clearly see, but subtle resistance. Thoughts, doubts, excuses that feel real, that feel logical, that feel justified. This is not the right time. I need to be more prepared. What if it doesn't work? What if I fail? What will people think? And those thoughts, they stop you. Not because they're true, but because they feel true. Because they align with your existing beliefs. Because they protect you from discomfort, from risk, from uncertainty. And you listen because it feels safe, because it feels like the smart decision, because it doesn't challenge you. But that safety is what keeps you stuck. Because every time you choose safety over growth, you reinforce the prison, you strengthen the limits, you confirm the belief that you can't move forward. And over time, that becomes your pattern, your default, your identity. The person who wants change but doesn't act. The person who dreams but doesn't move. The person who knows but doesn't do. And that's self-sabotage. Not intentional, not conscious, but real. Because your mind is working against you.
Not because it's broken, but because it's doing its job. Its job is to keep you safe, not to make you successful. And success requires the opposite. It requires risk, uncertainty, discomfort, failure. All the things your mind tries to avoid. So there's a conflict between what you want and how your mind operates. And unless you understand that, you'll keep losing that battle. You'll keep trying and stopping, over and over again, because you think something is wrong with you, that you lack discipline, that you lack motivation. But that's not the problem. The problem is your mind's resistance. And once you see that, you stop taking it personally. You stop thinking, I'm weak, I can't do this, I'm not capable. Because that's not true. You're capable. You're just being resisted by your own mind. So instead of fighting it blindly, you work with it. You understand it. You recognize the patterns, the thoughts, the excuses, and you question them. Because not every thought is true. Not every feeling is accurate. Not every doubt is valid. They're just signals. Signals of discomfort. Signals of change. Signals that you're stepping outside of what's familiar. And that's exactly where you need to be. Because growth only happens there. Outside comfort. Outside safety. Outside the known. So when you feel resistance, when you feel doubt, when you feel hesitation, don't see it as a stop sign. See it as a signal that you're moving in the right direction. Because if it was easy, if it felt comfortable, if it didn't challenge you, you wouldn't be growing. You'd be repeating. So the next time your mind tells you to stop, pause, observe it. Don't react immediately. Ask yourself, is this real or just my mind protecting me? And most of the time, it's protection, not truth. And once you see that, you gain control. Because now, you don't follow every thought. You don't believe every doubt. You don't obey every fear. You choose, consciously, intentionally, to move anyway, to act anyway, to step forward even when your mind says no. And that's the shift. From being controlled to being aware. From being reactive to being intentional. From being stuck to moving. Because now you understand the game. You understand the system. You understand the resistance. And once you understand it, you can break it. Not easily, not instantly, but consistently, step by step, action by action, decision by decision, until your mind stops controlling you and starts following you. And that's when everything changes. Because now, you're not trapped anymore. Not by your situation, not by your environment, not by your mind. Because you took control. And that's the first real step to breaking the prison.
You think you're in control. You think your decisions are yours. You think the way you live is based on what you want. But look closer, because most of what you do is not a conscious choice. It's automatic. It's driven. It's controlled by something deeper, something you don't see, something you don't question. Your beliefs. Not the ones you say out loud, not the ones you tell people, but the ones you carry inside. The ones that shape how you think, how you act, how you respond to everything. Because beliefs, they're not just ideas, they're filters. They decide how you see the world, what you focus on, what you ignore, what you think is possible, and what you think is not. And the most dangerous part, you don't even realize you have them because they feel like truth. They feel like reality. They feel like facts.
but they're not. They're just interpretations built over time, from experience, from influence, from repetition. Think about it. Why do you believe certain things are not for you? Why do you feel some paths are impossible? Why do you assume certain outcomes will fail? Those thoughts, they didn't come from nowhere. They were learned, conditioned, installed through your environment, through your past, through what you've seen and what you've been told. And over time, they became part of you, part of your identity, part of how you see yourself. And once something becomes identity, you stop questioning it, you accept it, you live by it, without even realizing. And that's where the control happens, not from outside, from inside. Because your beliefs, they don't just influence your thinking, they control your actions. If you believe, I'm not good enough, you don't try. If you believe it's too late, you don't start. If you believe I can't do that, you don't even consider it. And those actions, or lack of actions, shape your life. So it's not your situation that's controlling you, it's your beliefs about your situation. Because two people can face the same reality, same challenges, same limitations, and one sees possibility, the other sees barriers. Why? Because their beliefs are different, and that changes everything. Because your life doesn't follow reality, it follows your perception of reality. And your perception is shaped by your beliefs. So if your beliefs are limited, your life becomes limited. If your beliefs are negative, your life becomes restricted. If your beliefs are fixed, your life becomes stuck. And that's the prison. Not your circumstances, not your environment, your beliefs. Because they create invisible limits, limits that feel real, limits that feel justified, limits that feel truth. But they're not. They're just stories. Stories you've been telling yourself for years. Stories you've accepted without questioning. Stories that define what you think you can do and what you think you can't. And until you challenge those stories, nothing changes. Because you'll keep acting based on them. You'll keep making decisions based on them. You'll keep living your life according to them. And that keeps you trapped, not physically, but mentally. Because even when opportunities appear, you don't take them. Even when chances exist, you don't see them. Even when possibilities are there, you ignore them. Because your beliefs filter them out. They only show you what you already believe. And that's the limitation, not reality, your interpretation of it. So how do you break that? You start by questioning, not everything, but the things you've always assumed, the things you've always believed without thinking. Ask yourself, is this actually true, or is this just something I've accepted? Did I prove this myself, or did I learn it from someone else? Because most of the time, it's not yours, it's inherited from people, from experiences, from moments that shaped your thinking. But those moments don't define your future unless you let them, unless you keep believing them, unless you keep acting on them. So you challenge them, one by one. You replace them, not with lies, but with possibility, with openness, with a willingness to see things differently. Because your beliefs are not fixed. They can change, they can evolve, they can be rebuilt. But only if you recognize them first, only if you become aware of what's controlling you. Because once you see it, you gain power, the power to question, the power to choose, the power to change. And that's the shift, from being controlled to being conscious, from living by default to living by design. Because your life is not defined by what happens to you, it's defined by what you believe about it. And once you change that, everything changes. Because now, you're not limited by your past. You're not restricted by your thoughts. You're not controlled by your beliefs. You are free. Not physically, but mentally. And that's where real freedom begins.
You trust your thoughts. automatically, without question, because they feel real. They feel immediate. They feel like truth. When a thought appears, you don't stop and analyze it. You don't question it. You accept it, and you act based on it, because that's how your mind works. It produces thoughts, constantly, endlessly, every second. And most of the time, you don't even notice them. They just flow, in the background, quietly shaping how you feel, how you react, how you decide. And the dangerous part is, not all of those thoughts are true. Not all of them are accurate. Not all of them reflect reality. But they feel like they do. Because your mind is not designed to tell the truth. It's designed to create meaning, to interpret, to make sense of things, even when it doesn't have full information. So it fills the gaps with assumptions, with patterns, with past experiences. And those assumptions, they become thoughts. Thoughts that feel real, because they come from your mind. But they're not always correct. Think about it. How many times have you thought, this won't work? I'm not good enough. This is too hard. I'll fail. And you believed it, without evidence, without proof, without questioning, because it felt true, because your mind said it. But those thoughts, they're not facts. They're interpretations, based on your past, based on your beliefs, based on your fears. And your mind uses those to predict the future, to keep you safe, to avoid risk. So it creates negative scenarios, worst-case outcomes, doubts, and presents them as certain, as if they're guaranteed, but they're not. They're just possibilities, and often they're wrong. But you don't see that because you don't question them. You accept them. And once you accept a thought, it affects how you feel. If you think, I can't do this, you feel doubt. If you think, this will fail, you feel fear. If you think, it's too late, you feel hopeless. And those feelings, they influence your actions. You hesitate, you avoid, you delay, you don't try. And that creates a cycle, a loop, where your thoughts create your feelings create your actions reinforce your thoughts. And that loop keeps repeating because it feels real, because it feels consistent, because it feels like truth. But it's not. It's a pattern, a mental pattern, built over time, from repetition, from experience, from belief. And once it's built, it runs automatically, without you realizing. So now, you're not thinking consciously, you're reacting automatically, following thoughts that were never questioned, that were never challenged, that were never verified. And that's the trap. Because your mind becomes your reality, even when it's wrong, even when it's limited, even when it's based on fear, because you believe it. And belief is powerful. It shapes everything. But here's the truth. You are not your thoughts. You experience them, you observe them, but you are not them. And that distinction, it changes everything. Because now, you don't have to believe everything you think. You don't have to follow every thought that appears in your mind. You can pause, observe, question, and choose. Because not every thought deserves your attention. Not every thought deserves your belief. Not every thought deserves your action. Some thoughts are just noise, old patterns, automatic responses that don't serve you, that limit you, that keep you stuck. So instead of accepting them, you challenge them. You ask, is this true? Do I have proof? Or is this just fear? And most of the time, it's fear, not reality. Because your mind defaults to protection, not possibility.
It shows you what could go wrong, not what could go right. It focuses on risk, not opportunity, because that's how it keeps you safe. But safety is not always what you need. Sometimes you need growth, and growth requires you to go beyond your thoughts, beyond your doubts, beyond what feels true in the moment. Because what feels true is not always real, and what feels real is not always accurate. So you learn to separate, to see your thoughts as thoughts, not facts, not reality, just ideas passing through your mind. And once you do that, you gain control, because now you're not controlled by your thinking. You're aware of it. You can choose what to believe, what to follow, what to ignore. And that's the shift, from being trapped in your mind to being aware of your mind. And that's how you break the illusion, not by stopping thoughts, but by understanding them, by questioning them, by not letting them define your reality. Because your thoughts are powerful, but only if you believe them. And once you stop believing everything you think, you start seeing clearly. You start acting differently. You start breaking free from the patterns that kept you stuck. And that's the beginning of real control. Not over your life, but over your mind. And once you control your mind, you change everything.
You think fear is the problem. You think fear is what's stopping you. You think if I didn't feel this fear, I would move, I would act, I would change. But what if fear is not the enemy? What if fear is just a signal, a system, a mechanism built inside your mind for a specific reason? Because fear was never designed to stop you. It was designed to protect you, to keep you alive, to help you avoid danger. And for that purpose, it works perfectly. Because thousands of years ago, fear meant survival. If something felt dangerous, you avoided it, and that kept you alive. But today, that same system is still active, still running, still reacting. But the world has changed. The threats are different. You're not being chased. You're not in physical danger. But your mind doesn't know that. It still reacts the same way to anything unfamiliar, anything uncertain, anything outside your comfort. So when you think about change, when you consider something new, when you step outside your routine, your mind triggers fear. Not because it's actually dangerous, but because it's unknown. And unknown feels like risk, feels like threat, feels like something to avoid. So your mind reacts. It creates doubt. It creates hesitation. It creates scenarios of what could go wrong. What if you fail? What if it doesn't work? What if people judge you? What if you lose everything? And those thoughts, they feel real. They feel urgent. They feel important because fear amplifies them. It makes them louder, stronger, harder to ignore. And your body reacts. Your heart beats faster. Your mind races. You feel uncomfortable. And your instinct is to escape, to avoid, to go back to what feels safe. And that's the trap. Because fear is not always protecting you from danger. Sometimes it's protecting you from growth, from change, from becoming something different. Because your mind prefers what's known, even if it's not ideal, even if it's not what you want. Because it's predictable, because it's controlled, because it doesn't require adaptation. But growth is the opposite. It requires change. It requires uncertainty. It requires stepping into something you don't fully understand yet. And your mind resists that, not because it's wrong, but because it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar triggers fear. So every time you try to move forward, your mind pulls you back, not physically, but mentally, with thoughts, with doubts, with fear. And you listen, because it feels real, because it feels important, because it feels like you're making the smart decision. But you're not. You're just following fear. And fear is not always accurate.
It's not always logical. It's not always based on reality. It's based on protection, on survival, on avoiding discomfort. But discomfort is not danger. Discomfort is growth. It's the signal that you're stepping outside your limits, that you're expanding, that you're moving forward. But your mind interprets it differently. It sees discomfort as something to avoid, as something to escape, as something that means stop. But what if that's wrong? What if discomfort is actually the sign that you're on the right path? Because think about it. Everything that has ever helped you grow was uncomfortable. Learning something new, trying something different, taking a risk, making a change. None of it felt easy. None of it felt safe. But it moved you forward. It changed you. It improved you. And that's the truth most people don't accept. That growth and fear exist together. You don't eliminate fear to move forward. You move forward despite it. You act even when you feel it. You step forward even when your mind says no. Because that's how you break the trap. Not by waiting for fear to disappear, but by not letting it control you. Because fear will always be there, in some form, at some level, whenever you try something new, whenever you step outside comfort, whenever you push your limits. And that's normal. That's expected. That's part of the process. So instead of avoiding it, you understand it. You recognize it. You see it for what it is. A signal, not a command. A reaction, not a reality. And once you do that, you change your response. You stop reacting automatically. You stop following every fear. You pause, you observe, and you ask, is this real danger or just my mind reacting? And most of the time, it's your mind, not reality. And that awareness, it gives you control. Because now, you don't obey fear. You choose your action. You decide to move anyway, to act anyway, to step forward even when it feels uncomfortable. And that's the shift, from being controlled to being aware, from being reactive to being intentional, from being trapped to being free. Because now, fear doesn't stop you. It signals you. It shows you where growth is, where change is, where your limits are. And instead of running from it, you move toward it, because you know that's where your next level is. That's where your real life begins. Outside fear, outside comfort, outside the prison your mind created. And that's how you break it, not by removing fear, but by moving beyond it.
You don't just act a certain way. You don't just think a certain way. You don't just behave a certain way. You become it. Over time, your thoughts, your habits, your patterns, they build something, an identity, a version of yourself that feels real, that feels fixed, that feels like this is who I am. And once something becomes identity, you stop questioning it, you stop changing it, you protect it, even if it's limiting you, even if it's holding you back, even if it's keeping you stuck. Because identity is powerful. It defines your actions, your decisions, your limits. Because you don't act randomly. You act according to who you believe you are. If you believe I'm not confident, you act that way. If you believe I'm not disciplined, you behave that way. If you believe I'm not capable, you limit yourself, not because it's true, but because it's your identity. And identity feels permanent. It feels like something you can't change, like something that defines you. But here's the truth. Your identity is not fixed. It's built, constructed, created over time, from your experiences, from your beliefs, from your repeated actions. And what's built can be rebuilt. But you don't see it that way, because you've been living inside it for so long. Because every day you reinforce it through your behavior, through your choices, through your thoughts. And that creates a loop, a powerful one. You believe something about yourself, so you act that way. And because you act that way, you confirm the belief, and that strengthens your identity. And that identity controls everything. Because now, it's not just something you think, it's something you are. And changing that feels like changing yourself, which feels uncomfortable, which feels difficult, which feels unnatural. So instead, you stay the same, even when you want to change, even when you know you need to change. Because your identity pulls you back. It keeps you aligned with who you've been, not who you could be. And that's the prison. Not your thoughts, not your fear, your identity. Because it locks everything in place. It creates boundaries, limits, expectations of what you can do and what you can't. Because once you define yourself, you live according to that definition. And breaking that requires something deep. Not just action, not just motivation, a shift. A complete shift in how you see yourself. Because you can't act differently if you still see yourself the same. You can't build a new life with an old identity. You can't break the prison while believing you belong in it. So the real question is, who are you? Not what you've been told, not what you've experienced, not what you've become by default, but who are you choosing to be? Because identity is not something you find. It's something you choose every day, through your actions, through your decisions, through your behavior. Because every time you act, you reinforce something, a pattern, a belief, an identity. So if you keep acting the same, you stay the same. But if you act differently, you start becoming different. And that's where the change happens. Not in thinking, not in planning, in action. Because action creates identity, not the other way around. You don't become confident, then act. You act and become confident. You don't become disciplined, then work. You work and become disciplined. You don't become a different person, then change your life. You change your actions and become a different person. And that's the key. Because your identity is flexible. It can evolve, it can shift, it can transform, but only if you allow it. Only if you stop holding on to who you've been. Only if you stop defining yourself by your past. Because your past doesn't define you. Your actions do, right now, in this moment. So if you want to break the prison, you don't just change what you do, you change who you are. Not by thinking, but by acting, by choosing to step outside your current identity, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels unnatural, even when it feels like this is not me. Because that's exactly the point. You're becoming someone new, someone different, someone not limited by your old beliefs, your old patterns, your old identity. And that process, it's not easy. It's not instant. It requires consistency, repetition, effort. But it's possible. Because identity is not fixed. It's built. And if it was built once, it can be built again. Better, stronger, more aligned with who you want to be. And once you do that, everything changes. Because now, you're not trying to escape the prison. You're becoming someone who was never meant to be in it. And that's the difference between staying stuck and breaking free. You've seen it now. You understand it. The prison, the thoughts, the fear, the identity. You know it's not your situation. You know it's your mind. And that realization, it's powerful, but it's not enough. Because awareness doesn't break the prison. Action does. Consistent, intentional, uncomfortable action. Because this prison wasn't built in one day. It was built over time, through repetition, through patterns, through beliefs. So breaking it requires the same thing. Repetition, consistency, new patterns, new beliefs, new actions. But where do you start? Not everywhere, not everything at once. You start small, with control. Control over your awareness. Because right now, most of your thinking is automatic. You don't choose your thoughts. They just happen, and you follow them without questioning, without noticing. So the first step is to slow down, to become aware of what's happening in your mind throughout the day. Notice your thoughts, your reactions, your patterns, not to judge them, not to fight them, just to see them. Because once you see them, you create space, space between you and your thoughts. And in that space, you gain control. Because now, you don't react instantly. You don't follow every thought. You observe. And that changes everything. Because awareness breaks autopilot. And autopilot is what keeps the prison running. So you interrupt it. Every time you notice a limiting thought, a negative belief, a familiar pattern, pause. Don't act immediately. Ask yourself, is this real or just my old pattern? That question creates separation. And once you separate, you can choose to follow it or to change it. And that's step 2, choice, conscious choice. Because breaking the prison is not about stopping thoughts. It's about choosing which ones to follow. Because you can't control what appears in your mind, but you can control what you act on. So when a thought says, I can't do this, you don't accept it. You question it. You challenge it. You act anyway. Even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels wrong, even if your mind resists. Because that's the point. You're not trying to feel different. You're trying to act different. Because action changes everything. Every time you act against your old pattern, you weaken it. Every time you choose differently, you create something new. And over time, that becomes your new default. But it requires consistency. Because one action is not enough. One decision is not enough. You have to repeat it daily until it becomes natural, until it becomes automatic, until it becomes you. And that's step 3, repetition. Because your mind learns through repetition. That's how the prison was built, and that's how it will be broken. So every day, you practice, you notice, you question, you act. Even when it's small, even when it feels insignificant. Because small actions add up. They build momentum. They create change over time. And that's how you rebuild your identity. Not by thinking differently, but by acting differently. Because identity follows behavior, not intention. So if you want to become someone new, you have to act like that person before you feel like that person, before you believe it, before it feels natural. Because feeling comes after action, not before. And that's the part most people get wrong. They wait to feel ready, to feel confident, to feel motivated. But those things come from action, not the other way around. So you stop waiting, you stop delaying, you act now, today, even if it's imperfect, even if it's uncomfortable, because imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. And that's how you break the prison, step by step, thought by thought, action by action, until one day you realize something. You're not thinking the same way anymore. You're not reacting the same way anymore. You're not acting the same way anymore. Because you've changed, not instantly, but gradually, through consistency, through awareness, through action. And that's the shift, from being controlled to being in control, from being stuck to moving, from being trapped to being free. But understand this, the prison will try to come back. The thoughts, the patterns, the old identity, they will still appear because they're familiar, because they're strong, because they've been there for years. But now you recognize them. Now you see them. Now you don't follow them blindly,
because you've built awareness, you've built control, you've built a new way of thinking, and that's what keeps you free. Not the absence of thoughts, but the presence of awareness. Because once you're aware, you can't be controlled the same way. You can't be trapped the same way. You can't be limited the same way. Because now you're conscious, and that changes everything. Because the prison was never locked. You were just unaware of the door. And now you've found it. So step through, not once, but every day, until it becomes your new reality. A life not controlled by your mind, but created by you.
For a long time, you believed something. You believed that you were stuck, that your situation was holding you back, that your environment was limiting you, that your circumstances were the reason you couldn't move forward. And it felt real. It felt justified. It felt like the truth, because everything around you seemed to confirm it. The routine, the repetition, the lack of change, the feeling of being in the same place again and again. So you accepted it. You accepted the idea that this is your reality, that this is your limit, that this is as far as you can go. But now, after everything you've seen, after everything you've realized, something changes. That belief starts to break, because you begin to see something deeper, something uncomfortable, something powerful. You were never actually stuck, not physically, not truly. You were just thinking in a way that made you feel stuck. And that's a big difference, because being stuck means there's no way out, no options, no movement, no possibility. But feeling stuck is different. It's internal, it's created, it's based on perception, not reality. And that's where the shift happens. When you realize that what you felt was not the full truth, it was your interpretation, your beliefs, your patterns, your mind creating a version of reality that felt limiting, and you followed it. You acted on it. You built your life according to it. And that's why it felt real, because you reinforced it every day through your actions, through your decisions, through your thinking. But now you see it. You see that the prison was never physical. It was mental. It was built from thoughts, beliefs, identity. And once you see that, everything changes. Because now you're not looking outside anymore. You're not blaming your situation. You're not waiting for something to change, because you know the change starts inside, with how you think, with how you see things, with how you respond. And that gives you power. Real power, because now you're not dependent on circumstances. You're not waiting for the perfect situation. You're not limited by what's around you. You're focused on what's inside you. And that's what you can control. Your thoughts, your actions, your decisions, your direction. And that's enough. Enough to start. Enough to move. Enough to change. Because you don't need everything to be perfect. You don't need everything to be clear. You don't need everything to be ideal. You just need to act from a different mindset, from a different perspective, from a different belief. Because once you change that, your actions change. And once your actions change, your life changes. Slowly but surely. Because you're no longer operating from limitation. You're operating from awareness, from possibility, from control. And that's the shift. From being stuck to realizing you were never stuck. You were just following a pattern, a mental pattern that kept you in the same place. But now you've broken it. You've seen through it. You've understood it. And that means you're no longer controlled by it. You're free. Not because your situation changed, but because your thinking changed. And that's the real freedom. Because now, wherever you go, whatever you face, you know something. You know that you're not limited by what's around you. You're only limited by how you think about it. And that changes everything. Because now you don't see obstacles as barriers. You see them as challenges, as things to navigate, as things to overcome, because you know that your mind is not your enemy anymore. It's your tool. And once you use it that way, you stop feeling stuck, even when things are hard, even when things are uncertain, even when things are not perfect. Because you know you can move, you can act, you can change, and that's what matters. Not perfection, not certainty, movement, action, progress, because that's what breaks the illusion. That's what proves you were never stuck. You were just waiting, waiting for the wrong things, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for confidence, waiting for clarity. But now you don't wait, you act. And that's the difference between being trapped and being free. Because freedom is not about your situation, it's about your mindset. And once you understand that, you stop looking for escape. You start creating change from where you are, with what you have. And that's when everything shifts. Because now you're not trying to escape the prison. You've already walked out of it, mentally. And once you're out mentally, everything else follows. Because your life follows your mind, and your mind is no longer stuck. And that means neither are you.
There's a shift. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. A moment where you stop and you realize something simple but powerful. Your life was never controlled by your situation. It was controlled by your mind. And now, for the first time, you see it clearly. The patterns, the thoughts, the beliefs, the fears, the identity that shaped everything, that decided how you acted, how you responded, how you lived. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to being unaware, because now you understand the system. You understand how your mind works, how it protects you, how it limits you, how it keeps you safe at the cost of growth. And that awareness, it changes everything. Because now you're not reacting automatically. You're choosing consciously, intentionally. You're no longer following every thought. You're observing them, questioning them, deciding what to believe and what to ignore. And that's power, real power. Because control over your mind is control over your life. Not completely, not perfectly, but significantly. Because your thoughts shape your actions, and your actions shape your reality. So when you change your thinking, you change your direction. And that's what's happening now. You're not the same person anymore, not mentally, not internally, because now you're aware. Aware of the patterns, aware of the limits, aware of the illusions. And awareness breaks control. Because once you see something, it loses its power over you. You're no longer trapped, not because the prison disappeared, but because you see the door, and you choose to walk through it every day, through your actions, through your decisions, through your mindset. Because breaking the prison is not a one-time event. It's a daily process, a daily choice to not fall back into old patterns, old thinking, old identity. Because they will still be there. They will still try to pull you back through thoughts, through fear, through comfort. But now you recognize them. Now
You don't follow them blindly. Now you choose differently. And that's the difference between being controlled and being in control. Because before, your mind was leading. Now you are. Before, your thoughts decided your actions. Now you decide your actions. Before, your beliefs limited your life. Now you question those limits and expand beyond them. And that shift, it's everything. Because now you're not waiting for change, you're creating it. You're not looking for answers, you're building them. You're not hoping for a better life, you're designing it. Through your choices, through your actions, through your mindset. And that's where real transformation happens. Not outside, not in your environment, but inside, in how you think, in how you respond, in how you see yourself. Because once you take control of your mind, you stop being a victim of your circumstances. You stop feeling stuck. You stop limiting yourself. Because you understand something deeper. That your life is not controlled by what happens to you. It's controlled by how you respond to it. And that gives you freedom. Real freedom. Not physical, but mental. And mental freedom changes everything. Because now you're not trapped by fear. You're not limited by doubt. You're not controlled by old patterns. You're free to choose, to act, to move, to become. And that's the final shift. From being stuck to being in control. From being limited to being aware. From being trapped to being free. But understand this, it doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. Because taking control of your mind is a continuous process, a daily practice, a constant awareness. Because your mind will always try to go back to what's familiar, to what's comfortable, to what it knows. But now you know better. Now you see it. Now you choose differently. And that's what keeps you free. Not perfection, not constant control, but awareness and choice every day. Because your mind is the most powerful tool you have, but only if you control it. Because if you don't, it will control you. And that's what kept you stuck. But not anymore. Not after this. Because now you've taken it back. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your identity, your control. And that changes everything. Because now you're not just living, you're creating. Not just reacting, but deciding. Not just existing, but becoming. And that's the difference between a life that feels trapped and a life that feels free. Because in the end, the prison was never real, but your freedom is. And now you've chosen it.